Paris, the city of lights, of love, of cafes, and the melodic flow of the Seine. But every light casts a shadow. In the 1990s, within those shadows of Paris, there walked a figure who struck fear into the very heart of the city, the beast of the Bastille, a predator of the night, stalking the streets, stealing the lives of young women, and whose identity remained a mystery for years. This is not just the story of murders. It is the story of an abandoned child, of a fractured identity, and of the gaps the justice system ignored time and time again. Gaps that carved, in blood, a nightmare into Paris's darkest years. Guy Georges, but in truth, he was not born with that name. In 1962, when he came into the world in France, the records listed him as Guy Rampillon. His father was an American soldier stationed at a NATO base. His mother, Hélène, was a young woman who, after a brief affair with this man, gave birth to a child. But the relationship did not last. Soon after, Hélène moved to the United States, leaving little Guy behind. From that moment on, his life was defined by absence, the things a child needs most: a stable home, a sense of safety, an identity Guy never found. He was placed into foster care, moved from one household to another. The French system of that era often concealed biological origins, issuing false birth certificates. And so Guy grew up never truly knowing who he was, trapped in a fractured sense of self. Psychologists and researchers agree. His later violence cannot be explained by this trauma alone. But abandonment and growing up without identity planted the seeds of deep anger inside him. As a child, he began with petty theft. Then came reports of cruelty to animals and aggressive behavior toward his peers. What others called family was something he never really knew. Instead of love, he found coldness. Instead of belonging, he lived with loneliness. And that loneliness, over the years, began to harden into a dark identity of violence. Guy Georges' story was shaped beneath the shadow of a loneliness that began in childhood. He had been placed under state care. His name changed, his origins concealed. No one could foresee what kind of man a child without identity would one day become. But the signs appeared very early. In adolescence, he began harming animals. At home, records show he attacked his siblings, even attempting strangulation. Later, he turned his focus outward, attempted assaults on young women. Most victims either managed to escape or survived injured, and with each attempt, he gained more courage. From the late 1970s through the 1980s, many incidents were reported, yet each time, the punishments were light. A few months, sometimes a year in prison. Then he was free again, and once free, he returned to the same crimes. The stance of the French justice system in that era remains debated even today. Researchers point out light sentences and lack of follow-up open the door to future tragedies. Guy Georges was becoming a machine of crime. Every sentence made him not safer, but more dangerous. By the end of the 1980s, that cycle had become unbreakable. His violence would not remain just assaults. And when the year 1991 arrived, the streets of Paris saw, for the first time, the shadow of a crime that ended in death. January 24th, 1991. The man who would be known as the Beast of the Bastille claimed his first victim. January 24th, 1991. As an ordinary day came to an end in eastern Paris, The life of a young woman was suddenly cut short. 19-year-old Pascale Escarfale was found in her apartment with her throat slashed. The crime was savage, but it seemed isolated. Police shelved the case without finding the killer. No one knew this was only the beginning. Then came 3 years of silence. In December 1994, Dutch student Agnes Nijkamp was found dead in Paris. She had been strangled, and her body bore knife wounds. The method echoed the crime from 3 years earlier. Yet once again, the cases were not connected. Through 1995 and 1996, bloody traces appeared one after another. All the victims were young women. Catherine Roche, 27 years old. Elsa Beniti, 22 years old. Hélène Franking, 27 years old. Magali Sarati, 19 years old. They all shared the same fate: strangulation and stab wounds. Their lives were different, but their deaths were nearly identical. The killer was leaving a signature. But at the time, French police were not effectively using DNA databases. The murders continued to look like separate cases. The press finally took notice of the terrifying pattern. In 1997, newspapers gave him a name: La Bête de Bastille, the Beast of the Bastille. That nickname struck fear not only in eastern Paris, but across all of France. Young women no longer dared to walk alone at night. And the final blow came in October 1997. 25-year-old Estelle Magd was brutally murdered outside her home. This crime was different. Because her family and friends kept the case alive in the media, public pressure mounted. At last, police were forced to take the similarities between the murders seriously. But by then, it was too late. By that point, at least 7 women had died at the hands of the same man. If the cases had been linked in time, perhaps those lives could have been saved. But the Beast of the Bastille had not yet spoken his final word. In 1998, an unexpected clue and the power of science would finally drag this shadow into the light. March 27th, 1998. An ordinary morning in Paris. Guy Georges was quietly taken into custody by the police. For years, there had been suspicions that he was behind the chain of murders that terrified the city. But this time, it wasn't just suspicion. Science was speaking. DNA analysis showed that George's traces matched exactly with those found at 4 different crime scenes. That screamed one undeniable truth. There was a serial killer roaming Paris, and his name was Guy Georges. As investigators revisited his past, the picture grew even darker. At least 7 young women murdered and dozens of assaults. This case became one of the darkest chapters in French history. March of 2001. The trial began. Newspapers, television, every media outlet was focused on this case. When Guy Georges entered the courtroom, even his cold silence sent chills through the audience. The defense denied the charges. Georges claimed the police had tortured him, but the DNA evidence and the testimonies of survivors completely shattered that defense. Throughout the hearings, the victims' families took the stand. They spoke through tears. They reminded everyone not only of their daughters, but also of the state's failures in providing safety. France's criminal justice system, the foster care programs, all of it was suddenly at the heart of public debate. April 5th, 2001. The Paris court delivered its verdict. Guy Georges was sentenced to life in prison. By law, he could apply for parole after 22 years, but the brutality of his crimes and the weight of public outrage made it clear he should never walk free again. The case of Guy Georges became a turning point in France. Women's safety and the undeniable power of DNA technology in criminal justice could no longer be ignored. And the story of the Beast of the Bastille was remembered not only as that of a serial killer, but also as a story of a system full of deadly gaps. The story of the Beast of the Bastille is not only about the horrific crimes of one man. It is the story of neglect, of gaps within the system, and of justice that arrived far too late. If the files had been connected in time, perhaps many young women would still be alive today. But they were not. And even now, the lessons from this case continue to echo in society's memory. Guy Georges is spending his life behind bars, but the memory of the victims and the lives they left behind must never be forgotten. If you stayed with us through this story, then you're now part of our true crime family. To keep exploring the darkest sides of real crime together, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll meet again in the next case. Stay safe, because sometimes reality is darker than imagination.